part of my work is being a statistician for the Swedish Twin Register, working with twin data. But another part is working with population registers and family data here from Sweden. So today, the main topic is how family data can be used to investigate causality and confounding, or potential unmeasured confounding. I quickly realized that it would be very beneficial for me and hopefully for you in this room if we were able to talk about this using something called directed acyclic graphs. So I will be talking about that as well during the talk. I will focus in on one specific example when I'm talking about how we can use family data to think about causality. And the example is maternal smoking during pregnancy and ADHD in the offspring. 2003, there's one quite nice review article in a quite reputable journal, American Journal of Psychiatry, where they look at different maternal lifestyle factors during pregnancy and how they are associated with offspring adverse outcomes, including ADHD. And this study included a lot of good researchers who I have the highest respect for. So I'm not really criticizing them here because they were talking about what was the knowledge at that time about smoking during pregnancy and ADHD. The case control studies, they had about 5 or 6 different studies from different places, provide support for the hypothesis that prenatal exposure to nicotine, through smoking, may result in ADHD symptoms. Well, you can notice the careful language here. They are not saying cause, but that is what is implied. Smoking during pregnancy causes ADHD in offspring. And this was the best evidence available because there are no randomized controlled trials for smoking during pregnancy for obvious reasons. It would be unethical to perform such a study, and it would never be performed. So we need to use real world data to think about this association, this research question. In addition, there were other types of studies, not just the standard epidemiological studies, but other approaches that were supportive of the same conclusion, including twin studies and studies in high-risk siblings of individuals with ADHD. So high risk for ADHD, that is. On top of that, there were animal studies where they introduced nicotine in the brains of mice and looked at their offspring, and that also confirmed this conclusion. What were they doing? What is the hypothesis, the statistical hypothesis? And we could dare to think about causality here. So the idea is that SDP, smoking during pregnancy, is associated with ADHD. And the question is if the association is direct. Is it the exposure per se that causes a change in the risk for ADHD in the offspring? Or could it potentially be to a common reason causing both smoking during pregnancy in the mother and ADHD in the offspring? And the focus is on this. I write a U here, but it represents different statistical covariates like maternal age, sex of the offspring, birth year, because we have changes in diagnostic patterns over time and in smoking as well. So maternal age, for example, in the studies, they have measured maternal age at conception or at childbirth, and they have statistically adjusted for it. I'm indicating that with a box around that specific variable. And then they look at the association between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD, and it remains. And that is then evidence in agreement with causal hypothesis. So they make that interpretation. Yeah, we have maternal age. We have, I mentioned before, they had this thinking about maybe it's something in the family, a high-risk co-sibling of one with an individual with an ADHD diagnosis, and so on. So they were thinking about that, and probably they were quite aware that there's something going on. We're trying to measure it, but how can we be sure that we have measured all of it? Okay, so I will get back to this, but first I want to take a side route. So I showed you this picture here. Letters and arrows. It is actually a specific type of causal diagram called directed acyclic graph. I will now give you a short crash course in directed acyclic graphs. The commonly used abbreviation is DAGs, so I will say DAGs. Starting out very easy, so what's in a DAG? It consists of variables, and I'm just writing the name of the variables here. You can also refer to these variables as nodes if you want to. That's a more technical term, but let's just call them variables. So for example, here I have maternal smoking during pregnancy and ADHD. I have maternal ADHD. I have SES, which is socioeconomic status, and I have school grades. This is just an example, so we can look at something while I go through the DAGs. The second thing we can find in a DAG are something called edges, or its arrows might be a simpler word, and it indicates causation. So in this DAG here, and I'm not saying that this is right, by the way, this is made up in my head. I'm saying that socioeconomic status causes maternal smoking during pregnancy. So it's a direction of causation encoded in that arrow. Something not seen here is that the arrows never make a cycle. So you can never start at one variable, follow the arrows and get back in the right direction, so to speak, and get back to that one variable. And the simple reason is that such feedback loops would not permit us to draw causal inferences from the representation of how the variables fit together in this DAG. A word we need to know is a path. A path is any way that you can go along these edges, the arrows, between two variables. It doesn't matter which way the arrows are pointing to say that it's a path. But the paths can mean different things. So let's start like this. The path between two variables is closed if there is a fork in it. And a fork is wherever two arrows meet. And if it is closed, the path, then we would see no association between the variables. So one example here, maternal ADHD and socioeconomic status in this DAG, which I'm not saying is a correct DAG. The only path between them is along these arrows. But here, these two arrows point at the same variable, so it's a fork. That variable is most often referred to as a collider. So in this DAG, maternal ADHD and socioeconomic status would not be associated. Are you following? Yes. Some happy faces, some nods. Second example here, smoking during pregnancy and ADHD. That's what we're interested in. In this DAG, the path between them are through these arrows. And along these arrows, school grades is in a fork, two arrows pointing towards it. School grades is a collider, and therefore smoking during pregnancy and ADHD would not be associated if this DAG is a true. Okay, a couple of more things about the DAGs. Maybe more interesting then. A path is open if there is no fork in the path. So now I changed the arrows a bit here. Let's look at the path between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD and offspring. The direct arrow, the one that we're most interested in, the causal effect of smoking during pregnancy and ADHD, does not have a fork in it. So it's an open path. A second path we can go between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD is through SES here. And it is open because there is no fork in this path. And we can also find a third path. Smoking during pregnancy, SES, maternal ADHD to ADHD. It is also open because there is no fork in it. And these open paths, they will contribute to association between the two variables of interest. So it's closed if there's a fork, it's open if there is no fork, and we can close a path by statistical adjustment. And statistical adjustment can mean different things. So a standard way is including a covariate in a regression model, but it could also be what I call stratification. Simply, we look only at mothers with one level of ADHD here. They have it or they don't have it, and we look only within them. That would be statistical adjustment by stratification, and that would close the path, which I indicated once again with this square around that variable. Another possibly important way to adjust for a covariate is by matching. So we make sure that there are equally many with and without ADHD who have smoking during pregnancy, or vice versa. Equally many with smoking who have ADHD as do not have ADHD, and the same among those who did not smoke. So it would be matching, and we are adjusting for the influence of that covariate by simply having a balanced number of individuals with a certain level of the covariate. Hope that's not too technical. And a final note here, I know it's not super important for what I'm talking about, but since I'm talking about DAGs, adjustment isn't always a good idea. Particularly in the DAGs, the variables that we call that collider that are in a fork, if we adjust for them, so because that path was closed, if we adjust for them, we open the path again. So we introduce an association. Most likely an association, for almost all scenarios I can think about, an association we are not interested in. We don't want to adjust for that variable. So in this example, well, I write here, don't do it. That's the start there, and then if you have a very good reason to do it, feel free to do it. So for this association, socioeconomic status and ADHD, if I do adjust for school grades, which is a collider, I will introduce an association through that path. And when I look at the association between socioeconomic status and ADHD, there's no way to discern whether the direct association exists or not, because I have introduced another association. That's why you should not adjust for colliders. Are you following? Some nods. Nobody is sleeping, at least. Let's see if I can activate you here. So suppose this is the true DAG. This is how real worlds accept that for now. And I'm running a study on smoking during pregnancy and ADHD. Which variables should I adjust for to not have other open paths, other contributions to the association? Now it was quiet. So I don't want to have the possibility to go between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD along these arrows without hitting a fork. So I want to close the paths that are open. And I could do that by statistical adjustment. Yes?
Maternal ADHD and SES.
Yes, 2 right answers. Great. Because once I adjust for them, there are no other paths between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD that are open. Because we have closed the previously open path here, the previously open path here, as well as the previously open path here. Okay, so now we know DAGs. And the things I've been talking about now is just generally, as an epidemiologist, this is a tool that I use all the time, discussing with Seng and Henrik and other people about our design of our studies. What variables do we have? What variables do we not have? How do they fit together? We need to be explicit about it, and that informs us how should we perform. So basically here I'm talking about covariate selection. But I want to use it for something else now. What I mentioned before, the studies that had been performed said that they adjusted for things that were open paths. Another word we could use is confounders between the association of smoking during pregnancy and ADHD. The big question is, how could we know, or they know, that we have all the possible use, the possible variables that could be confounder? I mean, how can we figure them out? How can we measure all of them? What about the ones we can think of but not really measure? What about how we measure them? The example of maternal ADHD. How do we conceptualize maternal ADHD? Is it a diagnosis, yes or no? Is it some type of score of number of fulfilled symptoms? Is it several sub-dimensions, hyperactivity, inattention, impulsivity? Exactly which scale is it to be used for us to feel comfortable enough to say that we have adjusted for every possible way that this construct, maternal ADHD, can affect the association between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD in offspring? Even when we figure it out, we are still stuck with a problem. And the mother's ADHD, it's a good example here. This is most certainly a confounder, a common cause that opens a path between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD, which is not the direct path. Because mother's ADHD is associated with smoking during pregnancy, it is associated most certainly with offspring ADHD, because ADHD is highly heritable. So the offspring inherits DNA from the mother. Therefore, if the mother has a higher liability for ADHD, so will the offspring on average have. How do we actually measure it? That's a remaining problem. And I can make it even harder. What about genetics? So suppose there are genetic variants or positions in the genome that are contributing both to the behavior of smoking during pregnancy and a liability towards genetics. The mother would have or not have those variants. The offspring would, with greater probability, have a similar variance as the mother, and therefore we would have an association, an open path between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD. So even if we believe, or maybe we even know that this is true, how would we solve it? Because we don't know which are the variants, which are the genetic variants. We aren't there in genomic research yet. We can do analysis with polygenic risk scores, but I don't think anybody would argue that that would be a way to adjust for potential such genetic confounding. In a way, we are in a very hard situation here. So if we want to be able to claim causality, we have an almost impossible task. And this is where the family designs comes to rescue. I still had this mother's ADHD. What I did now, I moved this individual down here. This is one pregnancy. This is individual one's ADHD. And then he or she had a sibling. So the mother had another pregnancy, and she may have smoked or not smoked, and the offspring may have had ADHD or not. And you can notice here that under the presumption that maternal ADHD is constant between the two pregnancies, this is the same variable. So we can link the two siblings to each other in this DAG through this maternal trait of ADHD, which may be, most likely, is a confounder of the association between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD in offspring. Before getting to that, I wanted to make a stronger statement here. I took away this maternal ADHD, the example that is a pretty good example, and just put an U there. The U here, it represents anything and everything that is constant within the mother, then between the two pregnancies, and that is constantly affecting the offspring ADHD. So that does not only include maternal ADHD, it includes maternal genetics. That is constant throughout. And let's not think about the epigenetics here. And the maternal genetics here, well, I draw an arrow directly to ADHD. Well, it would go through the offspring genetics, but it's inherited from the mother, so it does not present a problem. So the point I wanted to make here then is that if you're looking at an association, smoking during pregnancy and ADHD, or something else within individuals, and you identify that the exposure in one individual is associated with the outcome in his or her relatives, then you should start to worry, at least a bit. Because then you should be fairly certain that at least the direct effect is not the sole cause of the association. There's something else. And on top of that, that something else is shared between the two relatives. And this example, the smoking during pregnancy, it's a good example because the exposure of the two siblings are traits from the mother. So it's the same person who is doing the exposure here. I have a slightly quick detour before getting back of how one can look at it. So it's a paper that we did on ADHD as the exposure this time, and eating disorders is the outcome. And we were interested in how is this associated with eating disorders? Is it direct? Is it something that relatives share? Genetics, perhaps? Let's figure this out. And the important thing I want to say here, we have a quite strong association. This is an odds ratio, so it's an 4 times increased risk of having eating disorder if you have ADHD compared to individuals who do not have ADHD. But also in the siblings. So if I have ADHD, then my sibling have an increased risk, about 1.44 here, of having an eating disorder. So something is certainly going on, something is shared. So in this study here, we certainly need to think about what is being shared between ADHD and eating disorder that is also shared across relatives. And these were full siblings here. Okay, that was just a quick detour to how you could think about it, because we want to do something else. So if it is shared, if there is an association between my mother smoking in my pregnancy and my brother's ADHD, then we would want to adjust away that confounding. As I said before, I'm mostly thinking about genetic confounding, but that's not all. It's anything that is stable. It could be the maternal ADHD. It could be genetics. It could be external environmental factors. You're living in a place with pollution or whatever. We don't even have to say what it is, but we want to adjust it away because we know that there is something here. Wouldn't it be great if we could? Yes, it would be great, and we can, of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here. But then it would be, we could finish the presentation now. We can, and there are a lot of different ways to do it. For me, at least, I use this word within family analysis, within relative analysis, to refer to a lot of different methods and designs that are aimed towards doing just this. There are a lot of designs and approaches, and there are even more names of these designs and approaches, and these are quite specific to which area of research you are from or working in. So I'm just mentioning some of the naming conventions here. It's fixed effects models. That's one way to talk about the statistical model that you will be using for the data. Conditional regressions, including conditional logistic regression, which is a common method in epidemiology. Designs could be discordant sibling, discordant twin designs. Discordant here refers to being discordant for the exposure, for the outcome, or for both. Co-twin control, when you are using twins, is another word for this. From the econometric and social science literature, this, I think Henrik said it already, the difference in difference methods and models used to analyze what they call panel data. These are all words talking about exactly the same thing. Let's adjust for something that is shared within the family for all measurements of the exposure and our confounders, with the outcome measured at all these different individuals. And I'm hesitating a bit here because I also want to add another thing. I'm using this for family analysis, but it could refer, statistically speaking, to other type of groups or clusters, as I, as a mathematician, like to say. It could be about an analysis within individuals. We are looking at one individual over time, and we want to do something to adjust for what's stable. It could be analysis within schools. There's something in the school that is making exposure and the outcome be correlated. Let's adjust for it. But now we're sticking with the families. Okay, so different words for statistical models and designs. So what do we actually do? Well, we do different things, but they all have something in common. We think about this thing that we call U here. We think about it as a distinct entity, even though we don't know what it is. We think about it as a distinct entity that exists for each and every one family, and we figure out ways that we could statistically adjust for it. One way to adjust away such an association is to, let's call it a matching procedure. So we perfectly balance the number of individuals within each family cluster with each of these variables who are exposed and who are unexposed. So equally many from every family who are exposed or unexposed. That turns out to be, let's call it discordant exposed pairs of relatives. Because then, if one of them is exposed and the other is unexposed, and that is true for all families, then there's a perfect balance of how many use from each family we have. So it cannot be a confounder anymore. So if we keep only those exposure discordant, then we can just run an analysis. Look at among the exposure discordant, one sibling exposed, the other non-exposed. What is the association to the outcome, ADHD? Okay, so I was talking about the first approach, which is relatively simple. So it doesn't require an advanced statistical knowledge. It requires some data management. But it's a bit crude and a bit wasteful, and you cannot do additional things. So you want to put it in a more flexible statistical framework. One way to do that is, what if we define a variable which has a different value per family? And then, as we would do with regular regression, we adjust for that. Would that work? Yes, it would work in theory. But in practice, maybe not, because that means in the regular framework, we would estimate a lot of regression coefficients, one per family. If we have hundreds of thousands of families, the statistical software screams and says, I can't do this, and it stops. That leads to another solution, and I'm calling it conditional regressions here. So it's actually thinking about this the same way as we do here. So we assume a separate covariate with a separate level per family, but through a clever trick in the mathematics and in the statistical model fitting, we never have to see them. They are taken away automatically. I don't know if that's the right word, but we don't have to worry about them. They are adjusted for. And I mentioned before, it depends on your background, but conditional logistic regressions are, at least in epidemiology, common knowledge. You know what it is, you have done it. But there are conditional linear regressions, so if we have a continuous outcome. There are conditional log linear regressions if you're looking at counts or you want to have a log, so exponential association, as well as conditional versions of survival analysis. Specifically, the stratified Cox model is one of those. But I'm leaving that now. We can't start to look at statistical models and R code. I'm mentioning an extra example here. We call it between within models, and it's quite simple. We include a family mean of the exposure. You can show that this does the same thing. It adjusts for a constant factor within the family. Any of these would do fine. Let's look at it. What happens if we do this? So Henrik did it together with colleagues from my department. And it's from 2014, so this is long ago. And this is, by the way, not the only study that has done this. So they looked at the Swedish population, about 760,000 individuals. Among these individuals, they identify more than 170 families with at least 2 siblings. During this time period, smoking was not super uncommon, so they could identify 130 pregnancies where the mother had smoked. And it was not too recently, so only 200,000 of these 760,000 offspring had ADHD diagnosis in our population registers. And they did what we do in epidemiology. They estimated an association. So what we see here is the exposure level. So smoking 1 to 9 cigarettes per day during pregnancy, or 10 or more cigarettes per day. And if we compare the mothers who smoked 1 to 9 cigarettes per day with the mothers who did not smoke, the risk for the outcome, ADHD, was increased by 89%. So the hazard ratio was 1.89, so it was almost double the risk for ADHD. And this was similar to what was seen already in 2003 review paper I was talking about. And it also increased in a dose-response manner. So the increase of risk for ADHD in offspring was 2.5 for the more heavy smoking mothers. Similarly, as the standard epidemiological studies, they started by adjusting for standard covariates: gender of offspring, birth year, the parity of the mother, maternal age, cohabitation status of the mother, mother's highest education level, and mother's country of birth. So it's a lot. All of these are possibly contributing to the association. So there are open paths between smoking during pregnancy and ADHD in the offspring because of these variables. But after the adjustment, we can see a change. The association is slightly weaker, but it's certainly not null. It remains. So thinking again about this DAG, we can think about these adjustments as adjusting for things that contributes to the association, surely, but certainly not this U that would be anything that contribute to the association that is shared within the family. Some of the variables are shared, but we don't think we are capturing all of them. In particular, what about maternal genetics or genetic confounding of the effect? So what they did then, and now we're adding a bit here, is that they are looking at cousins, so individuals whose parents are full siblings. So we're adjusting for whatever is constant between the pregnancies of two sisters. And genetics is not constant between two sisters. They share on average 50% of the co-segregating alleles. So we do adjust for something, part of that genetics, and maybe part of some environmental effects that are shared between mothers who are siblings. But the association does not disappear. It still remains until they compare within the same mother. So mother who have smoked in at least one and who have not smoked in at least one of the exposures, we can see that the association is null. It's actually at the other side of the null effect of 1, so a hazard ratio 1 means that the risk is the same among the offspring of pregnancies where the mother smoked and offspring of the pregnancies where the mother did not smoke. What does this mean then? Well, it means that according to this study, according to this design, smoking during pregnancy is unlikely to cause ADHD in offspring. And the association is confounded. It's better explained by factors that are shared between siblings, factors such as, the mother or the mother's genetics. This doesn't invalidate that we see an association. The association, we still see it. It's still a true association. It's just we probably know more now about why do we see such an association than we did before. If the aim is to lower the ADHD in the society, we want less ADHD, then we should probably not be starting with targeting mothers who smoke and making them not smoke, because that would not change the population ADHD. And I'm not saying that's an aim of ours. In addition, it could help reduce stigma in mothers who might have smoked during a pregnancy and have an offspring with ADHD. Oh, was it my fault? Was it my smoking that caused this ADHD, or wasn't it? I don't think so, based on the evidence that we have from population registers, at least. It's not like this is a golden arrow that will always give you the right answer. There are weaknesses in this type of designs. It's not something to hide. It's rather to be very open with it. That includes, I've been part of studies that we're looking at what are the weaknesses? How can we think about them? Are there situations where you should not do this type of design? And certainly there is. One basic issue could be that we could have confounders that varies between the pregnancies, and we just don't know it. That could reduce an association, or it could introduce an association. We could have other specific effects in families that carries over from the early pregnancy to the later pregnancy. So the older siblings' exposure have an effect on the younger siblings' outcome, or vice versa. And that would give us specific problems. In addition, these designs are extra sensitive to measurement error in the exposure, which could also introduce problems. And a third thing we have talked about is we require variation in the exposure outcome or both. And when we look at those families where that is true, that's a subset of all families. We cannot be sure that the analysis in that subset generalize to the whole population. So there are a lot of weaknesses. So we need other sources of inference to be able to claim causation or lack of causation. I wanted to say one more thing. It's the question, should we be worried? That would be the question. So oh, what if we do this, not golden arrow, but maybe a silver arrow for everything, and every association goes away? It's all just in the family. Are all associations confounded? Well, the answer is no, certainly not. We are running this type of analysis for different exposures and outcome. Sometimes the scenario is as it was for the smoking during pregnancy in ADHD. Sometimes it's not. But you should have a certain level of worry, because in humans, essentially all human traits are heritable. A couple of years ago, a study was published that summarized all the twin studies estimating heritability for human traits during 50 years for 7,000 traits in 15 million twins. And the main conclusion is that everything is heritable. There are within family associations for everything. So we need to be worried about it. Think about it as a potential explanation for associations we are seeing. And just to reiterate that this is not a way to, invalidate that association is real. It is certainly real. It's still true that children from pregnancies where the mother smoked have a higher risk for ADHD. That is still true. It's just that we gain more knowledge about why that is true.